Well, hey, y'all. Good morning. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing all right. I'm still feeling a little bit jet lagged myself. I just had some kind of little tiny piece of, a little cup of some kind of magic, and now I can hear colors. It's amazing caffeine they got out there. I am so excited to be here at another NDC Sydney and to present to you some information on Electron, building cross-platform desktop apps with Electron. This is a technology that I've been using for several years now to solve lots of little problems or build utilities and so forth. And I think it's a fun and fantastic technology to work with. So what we're covering today is what is Electron, why do we even want to consider building desktop apps in this web-first, mobile-first world that we live in today, give you a crash course on how to get started with Electron, and some tips to help you get started that I've learned through my experience so far. So to start off with, I want to tell you a story about how, I got started with Electron. So for a long time, I was on the Microsoft stack of technologies. I was at the Microsoft PDC in 2000 when .NET was announced, and they gave everybody at that conference a little book called Presenting C#. And this was also the time when C# was unveiled. Being the nerd that I am, I went back to my hotel room that night and I read that little book, Presenting C# from cover to cover, and I thought, this is it. I love this. This is the language I want to get behind, and this is the next evolution of web development for the Microsoft platform, and I was gung-ho. So for the longest time, I was a Microsoft .NET fanboy, and when the time came that I needed to build an app that was cross-platform, I knew that the mobile team at the company I was working at was having great success building mobile apps with Xamarin, and I had heard that there was a Xamarin desktop app that you could use to build desktop tools, and you could also build some command line tools as well. And I thought, well, that's what I'll do. I'll use my mad.NET skills and build some cross-platform desktop apps, and I'll knock this out of the park. So what I found in that experience was that as I tried to build some desktop apps is that, yes, you can have some shared .NET code between the different versions of the apps, but that's pretty much where the benefits ended. Xamarin Mac, at least at the time, I don't know if it's still the case, but it did not get the same amount of love that the iOS and Android apps get, and it was, very buggy and very hard to work with. The documentation was not great. Native UI was extremely hard because me being a web developer, I don't know anything about building desktop apps, and so having to, if you're building for Windows, you have to use WPF or WinForms. On the Mac, you have to build your UIs using Xcode UI Builder. And if you're building for Linux, God help you. And so Xamarin doesn't solve that issue. It doesn't give you like a unified way of building UI or front ends for your desktop app. So you're on your own to build those in kind of the native tools. Deployment was also not trivial. On Windows, you've got the advantage of having the .NET framework that you can deploy your apps to, but on Mac and Linux, having to distribute Mono or to have Mono built for those other platforms is not an easy thing to do. And at the time, this was before Microsoft had acquired Xamarin, so licensing was a deal breaker for me. It was $1,000 a year for a license for Xamarin, just for the Xamarin Mac, and that was that was too much to swallow for the kinds of one-off utilities and things that I needed to create that I wasn't going to be selling. These were just, to help some customers. So my experience through those few weeks that I tried, flailing desperately to make this work, it was a lot of frustration. So I heard about this thing called Electron, and I thought I'd give it a try. And the pros are that it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are technologies that I understand, being a web developer. I know how to build front ends with that. So being able to use, the kinds of front end technologies that I'm comfortable with to build a desktop app, that's very appealing to me. Electron is built on Node.js and Chrome, which is pretty cool. Node.js has gotten very popular, and it's something that I've, as a web developer, I started getting more and more into, and that was appealing to me. And there are no deployment dependencies. When building an Electron application, when you package your application together, you have basically a standalone app that it doesn't require your users or your customers to have some version of Node installed or even have Chrome installed. It's all self-contained, and you can deploy it as is. And another cool thing about it being Node and Chrome is that you're targeting one of the latest versions of Node and Chrome for your application. So you're not having to worry about cross-browser compatibility issues between Chrome and Firefox and IE or Edge. You're targeting specific versions of Node and Chrome, and it's pretty awesome. The experience I had, even in the very beginning, was it was easy to pick up, easy to use, and I had immediate success in building some applications. And as I mentioned before, you're targeting the latest versions of Node and Chrome, or the V8 engine that comes with Chrome and Node, and so you can use the latest ES6, ES7, whatever latest JavaScript features that are available for those platforms. So you can use, fat arrow syntax. You can now use async and await. You can use, promises if you want to use promises. But all the language features that have been added over the last few years, you have access to that without having to use a transpiler like Babel, and which is really awesome. So I'd be remiss not to mention, that there are, Electron's not a silver bullet. There are some drawbacks to Electron, and the drawback is that it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Wah, wah, wah. So if you're not already a web developer, that can be a bit of a challenge for you. But there's just so much out there that's available to help make you successful as far as front-end technologies and examples in JavaScript, and you can take advantage of the whole Node ecosystem to help build your desktop applications. So a little history about Electron. It was first created by GitHub for the Atom editor, and it was originally named the Atom shell. And to reduce confusion as to what you could do with this technology, they renamed it to Electron so that people could know that they could build more than just editors with it. It's been around since 2013. It's been very actively developed. The 1.0 release was in 2016, and just yesterday or 2 days ago, I don't know, my time zones and everything are all mixed up. But just recently, 3.0 was released, and which means I had to go and update all my demos last night. Anyway, it's very cool. They have continued to improve and make build in new features and capabilities into the Electron framework, and it shows no signs of slowing down. So some of the features that are available, there's rapid development. I mean, that makes it really easy to prototype and to build a desktop application. There's a number of hard problems with desktop apps that they have already solved for you with Electron, and that includes deployments and silent updates. So it's kind of built into the framework, the ability to have your Electron application running somewhere and have it be able to check for new versions of the application and download those versions and prompt the user to restart to upgrade your application. There's a number of native UX extensions that are built into Electron that make your Electron applications seem like native desktop apps. So things like the menus, dialogues, like file open and save, and printer dialogues, all those are native to each operating system that the application runs on. So that someone who is using your application would probably never know that it was a web app. It looks and you can make it look and feel as much of a native application as you want. You can definitely have shared code and UI between, since it's HTML and JavaScript. Chances are, if you have an existing web application and you want to take some of the guts of that application and port it over to a desktop app, you can probably leverage a lot of the code and things that you already have if it's around the front end of JavaScript, or even if you're using Node on the back end. And just like there's one of the popular things today is being able to customize your applications. Giving your customers the ability to make it look and feel like they want. Since it is HTML and CSS, you can easily swap out style sheets to give your customers the ability to change from a light or dark theme, or even to do rebrand your applications to different vertical markets. So if you want to go after one industry, and then rebrand it and go after another industry, it's just swapping out some CSS and a few assets. Electron is agnostic as far as what front-end technology you want to use. You can use whatever you want. You can use plain HTML and JavaScript. You can use jQuery, or you can use any of the popular front-end frameworks with it. There's no limit to what you want to use or what you're comfortable with. You can use those front-end tools to help build desktop apps. So why do we want to create desktop applications in this world that we live today? So I think there are a number of use cases, a number of scenarios that desktop apps still make sense. If you need offline capabilities, like an application that can go into the field and be able to do data entry or processing of information, or just being able to run disconnected from the internet, there's lots of scenarios where that makes sense. There's being able to access local hardware like printers and devices, scanners, readers. If you're building an application that needs to be able to operate that kind of those kind of devices, a desktop app usually makes a little more sense. Building on-premises applications. So this was my use case. When the company I used to work for was a cloud company, SaaS product, and to build integrations between other platforms and our product, we needed to have some tools or utilities that could run on-premise at the customer, because we couldn't expect the customer to open up their firewall and let us reach in and grab their data and synchronize it with ours. We needed an agent that could run, on their network, so that it could communicate with their applications and communicate back to us using our APIs. And this worked really well. Internal line of business applications, being able to edit local files. Maybe you want to take an application or idea or something that you've created and try to monetize that in the App Store. Electron supports both the Windows and the Mac app stores. You want to build kiosk type applications where, in a retail or healthcare scenario where someone walks up to a screen and the application that's on the screen is all they have, it's full screen. They don't have a way to break out of that application. That's all that they interact with. You can build that kind of application with Electron. And sometimes, depending on the type of company that you work for, maybe desktop is a whole lot easier to build apps for than than to deploy something to the intranet. You know, I've worked places where there was so much, you know, red tape to be able to deploy something to an intranet site, whereas maybe I've got 3 people that need to use my application. I can just put it on a flash drive and hand it to them and say, hey, here's my application, you can run it, which is probably terrifying to IT people. Sometimes, like I said, it just kind of feels right. You know, there's classes of applications that just feel right as a desktop app. Not to say that there aren't web versions of some of those apps, but still, people prefer like a mail client. You know, sometimes people just really prefer a desktop mail client compared as opposed to a web app. And so here are some desktop ideas. I just brainstormed. I'm not going to go through the full list, but you know, these are some different scenarios of where desktop apps may be the right solution, may just feel right. Like one of those things is I remember there was for a while there was an Electron application for doing database management. That was cross-platform. You could do SQL Server and Oracle and MySQL, and you know, that's the kind of thing where you wouldn't want that to be a web app. For that kind of tool to be a web app means you would have to open up your firewall and let that web app to communicate with your database servers. That's not going to happen, right? So you need something that's running on your desktop that can communicate with those systems. Some examples of Electron applications, you know, I mentioned Atom. This is what Electron was built for. And for a while, you know, Atom was a really fantastic, you know, kid on the block for an editor. You know, I know some people who still use it, and it is a fantastic editor. Slack is what got my attention. When I found out that Slack was essentially a web app running on my desktop, it blew my mind. Now, of course, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, we all know that Slack, you know, is kind of a bit of a memory hog and gives Electron a bit of a bad name now. But, I mean, it is a very impressive desktop application. This is what has really gotten a lot of people's attention. When I first saw Visual Studio Code, I thought, well, how did Microsoft pull off building a cross-platform desktop app with .NET? Because that was my assumption, right? It's like, you know, no way that Microsoft's going to use something other than their own, you know, platform for building something. And as I dug into it and found out that it was an Electron application, that really blew my mind. You know, it really is a new Microsoft. They're using, you know, essentially Node.js and Chrome. Well, it kind of makes sense now. You know, fast forward a few years, and now Microsoft has acquired, or in the process of acquiring, GitHub. You know, now it kind of makes a little bit more sense. Postman is another Electron application that is one of my favorites. If you do anything with APIs, if you support APIs or build APIs, this application is an invaluable tool that you can use to test and manipulate or use different APIs. And GitHub Desktop, the latest version of GitHub Desktop is now an Electron application. Pretty impressive. So how to Electron in a nutshell? You're going to need some version of Node installed on your computer, version 4 or later. It doesn't have to be the same version of Node that's packaged with, you know, the current version of Electron. As long as it's version 4 or higher, you're good to go. You're going to create a project folder for your desktop application, and inside that folder, you want to run npm install Electron. npm is one of the modules, is the module package manager that comes with Node that allows you to install dependencies, and of course, it's named Electron. Once you have that, you need a couple of files. You need a main.js as your kind of your entry point into your application, and you need at least one HTML file to load. And this is the bare bones, all that you need to create your first Hello World application in Electron. A little bit about how Electron works is you start off with an Electron application starts its life cycle as a Node.js process. And so you have main.js, or you can name it whatever you want to. You can name it start.js or server.js. The name doesn't matter, but the lifecycle starts as a main process in Node, and in Electron vocabulary they call this the main process or just process. And from there you can launch one or more instances of Chromium, and Chrome is the rendering engine that renders the UI, and these in Electron vocabulary are called renderers. And you can launch more than one. If you have an application that has multiple windows, you can launch those windows. You can show and hide those windows as you need to. You can do whatever you need to do. So I've shown you a little bit about how to get started with Electron. I want to show you just how easy it is to build your first application. So a main.js typically looks a lot like this. We require in the Electron module. So in Node.js, require is equivalent to like an imports or a using statement. This is how we pull in dependencies into the current application that we're running. So once we have Electron, then we can grab a couple of objects off of that Electron object, app and browser window. This is destructuring. This is a JavaScript language recent JavaScript language feature that we can take advantage of. So instead of saying const app equals electron.app and const browser window equals electron.browser window, we can just combine it into one line and pull it off at once. And then Electron has a number of, or the app object in Electron has a number of lifecycle events. So kind of like jQuery, if you've ever used jQuery document ready, the app on ready event is to let us know that the internals of Electron have finished, their initialization, and now it's ready for you to start taking over and building out whatever it is that you need. So in the ready event, we can create an instance of our main window, and we can specify things like the width and height of that window. But there are lots and lots of properties that we can set on that window, like the position, the minimum and maximum heights and widths. We can turn resizability on and off. We can set that kiosk mode so it launches at full screen, and the user can't do anything to exit out of that window. And then finally, we can call main window.load URL to load in our file, our index.html file, or whatever we name it, into that window that we've created. Index.html can be as simple as, plain HTML. And in this case, if we go to our command line and run npx electron and main.js, it will launch our hello world application, and it will look like this. If it's running on the Mac, it looks, the Chrome around it, the UI looks like a Mac app. If we run this on Windows, it's going to look like a Windows app. The cool thing to point out is that whatever we set in the title of the HTML becomes the title of that window, and whatever we put in the body of the HTML becomes the body, or becomes the contents of the desktop window. But this is the really cool thing about Electron. When I started using Electron, my assumption was, well, it's Node.js. I've got to create some kind of Node server running in the background and communicate between my front end. Now I'm thinking in terms of, as a web developer. I'm thinking I've got to make AJAX calls back to some fake server running on the desktop. That's not the case at all. In Electron, you have the full power of Node at your fingertips inside your HTML and JavaScript, your front-end JavaScript. So I can add a script tag to my HTML page and start to use Node.js libraries and other external libraries that I've brought in using npm. So process is a Node.js object that I can use to access things like the running environment and lots of things. So I can check the versions of Node and Electron and Chrome that are in there. And then this is the power of Electron, is that I can require in any module, any native module with Node, or any external module that I bring in. So in this case, I'm requiring in the file system module that's built into Node, and I'm enumerating the files and folders that are in the home directory of the current user that's running the application. So Electron extends Node with a number of shortcuts like this process.environment.home, which points to the home folder of the current user. And it's going to point at the right home folder when it's running on Mac and the right home folder when it's running on Windows and Linux. So it gives you one API that you can use that is going to be, it's going to work, across all the different environments or operating systems that the code runs. And again, I can use like the fat arrow syntax to, because I'm using the latest version of Node in there, and I can take advantage of JavaScript language features. And so I'll run this application. I can see that it's launching with Node 10.2 and Electron 3, and Chromium 66, and it's listed all the folders that's in my home folder. One tip while we're here is that you can since it is Chromium that we're dealing with, we can open the Chrome DevTools with our desktop application. So in this case, when I'm launching the app, I can open the DevTools, and I've got different modes. I can use detach, or I can attach it to the right side of the window or the bottom of the window. There's different modes there that you can use. And so if you're a web developer, you're probably familiar with the Chrome DevTools. You can use the same Chrome DevTools to inspect and debug the front-end code for your Electron application. So you can set breakpoints, you can step through and inspect nodes and all that kind of stuff. Pretty cool. You can look at your call stack and everything. So you may have heard this joke. There are two hard problems in software development: cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors, right? Well, I submit to you that there are 4 hard problems in software development. I don't know what your development life cycle is like in your organization, but something that I've discovered that's really, really critical to building applications over the last few years is choosing the right animated GIF to go along with, how you react to your coworkers' pull requests and code reviews, and it's really important to have the right animated GIFs to go along with your responses, especially in Slack. And of course, if you use Slack, which I'm sure most of you do, Giphy is just the worst. It's just categorically bad. No matter what you do, it's gonna pick the worst option available. So I built an Electron application called Reactor that helps me to choose the perfect animated GIF to express how I feel about things that are going on in Slack, or things that are the code review that I'm making. So this is a pretty good animated GIF of Spock, but I don't think it quite captures how I really feel about this person's code that I'm reviewing. So yeah, I think that one does it. I think that's a good analogy to how I feel about this code. So I can click on the button to copy it to my clipboard and paste that into Slack or GitHub or wherever I need to use this animated GIF. I believe this is the most important application I've created in my career. You can find this on my GitHub repo. Again, it's called Reactor. It's a lot of fun. All right, so there are modules that are included with Electron. Electron has extended Node with a number of modules that help you to build your desktop application. So there are some modules that are available to the main process, some that are available to the renderers, and some that are available to both. So in the process, you've got the app, which we've already seen. It's got application lifecycle events. You can parse command line arguments. You can access things like what are the paths to different folders, like the application folder or the user home folder. You can, of course, launch instances of browser windows. There's IPC, which is interprocess communications. So to be able to communicate between the instances of Chromium and your main process, you use IPC as kind of like a channel publish subscribe metaphor. So you can create channels and subscribe to them and publish messages and send messages back and forth. There's a dialog, which gives you the native file open and save, printer dialogues, and information and dialogues. There's a menu API that allows you to create in an agnostic way all the menus for your application. So on the Mac, it'll render the correct looking native menus, and on Windows, it creates the menus inside the window itself, all that kind of stuff. There's a power monitor, which not only allows you to know if the current operating system is running on battery or running on AC, you can have events where is the laptop being shut down, or is it going into hibernate mode, and you can take action based on those events. Also, you can prevent events like the screensaver kicking in. Maybe you're building a media application and you need to be able to show training videos as part of your application. You don't want those videos to be interrupted by the computer going to sleep, or the computer or the screensaver kicking in. So you can prevent those things from happening while your videos are running. There's a tray module for doing things like tray notifications, the bubbles or the tray that's at the top of the Mac OS icons. And on the renderer side, you've also got IPC for communicating messages back to the main process. You've got a special version of IPC called remote, which is kind of like, here's a command, here's some code that I want you to run on the main process. WebFrame, which is a kind of like an iframe. It behaves like an iframe, but this is a sandboxed frame. So back when I showed you the load URL, where you can load in a local HTML file, that's what you want to do, but maybe as a prototype, you can point that to an external HTML page. But that's a bit of a security concern for a desktop application. You don't want to just load in any arbitrary content. Even if you own, you are the author or own that website, you don't want, there may be a man-in-the-middle attack kind of scenario. You just don't want to arbitrarily pull in, HTML and JavaScript, from a source where you may not be guaranteed is coming from the right place. So this web frame is the ability to pull in external content, but it's sandboxed so that it doesn't have access to Node and the other things that you could, potentially be used for malicious purposes. So web frame is sandbox just like any HTML or any browser, just like Chrome running. So that's helpful. Modules that are available to both. You've got a clipboard, which allows you to copy things to and from the clipboard. There's a built-in crash reporter, so that you can, if your application crashes, you can post information to an endpoint. There's a native image module, allows you to handle different DPIs, retina displays or high DPI Windows displays. This is useful for icons that you use for tray notifications or things that are running in the tray. You can have different resolutions of those icons, or handle different versions of images to display. There's a screen module that not only allows you to enumerate the displays that are connected to the current operating system, but also see things like where's the cursor located, and be able to support multiple monitors. So you can launch an application on a window on one screen and another window on a different screen, so you can take advantage of the multiple monitors that are available. Then there's Shell, which allows you to launch external applications. So you can launch like the default application for a PDF reader. So like if you want to open a PDF, you can just use the Shell module, and whatever is registered on that operating system as the PDF application that'll load up. Or if you want to bundle some command line app tools with your application and run those in the background, you can do that as well. Or you can launch, you can certainly use nodes, child processes to launch things running in the background. Deploying Electron applications is, there's lots of scenarios. The most simple is you can take the Electron binaries that are pulled down from NPM and combine those with your HTML and CSS and JavaScript files and just hand that off to someone who needs to run your application. You can just, essentially copy those files to a flash drive and give them to somebody else, and they can run your application. There's nothing to install, right? As I mentioned before, there's no external dependencies. It's all self-contained. Now, the icon that's going to be visible when they run the application is going to look like an Electron application or an Electron icon. So the branding and stuff is all Electron. If you want to create your own application, then you can take that a step further and use Electron Packager. And that's going to take the version of Electron that you're building with, plus your HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and it's going to create an app file or an exe for Windows, and you can add in your own assets with that. So you can use your own desktop icon and name the windows and so forth to look like your own application. So then you can just copy those files and give them to someone, or zip those up. So that's kind of like what I've done in the past, is just create a zip file of all these files and allow someone to download it and extract it and run the executable. You can also take that another step further and use Electron Builder, which will take the build step of the Electron Packager and then turn around and create an installer for your application. So you get that installer experience on Windows. You get that kind of window experience where on the Mac, where you drag your application into the applications folder. It gives you what you would expect on each operating system. And on Linux, it gives you a Debian package that you can deploy and run to install. And if you combine that with Electron Updater, which is a kind of a nice wrapper around the updates and silent deployment capabilities that's built into Electron, that gives you a great way of hosting a server or an endpoint, or you can point it at a GitHub repository. There's a number of options that you can point Electron Updater to say, here's where to go and check for updated versions of the application. And if it finds one, it goes ahead and downloads it and gives you a notification that a new version is available. So if you've used Visual Studio Code, you know that sometimes when you run the application, there's a little notification that pops up at the top that says a new version is available. Do you want to apply or restart to apply that new version now? You can provide that same kind of experience to people who are using your application. Some recommended tools. Electron Debug gives you the ability to have those some keyboard shortcuts built in where you can launch the Chrome Dev Tools when your application is running. So I usually include this with my Electron application. So if someone, if it's an internal application and somebody calls me and says, hey, there's I'm having an issue with the application, I can tell them to hit F12 or was it Command-Shift-I or whatever, to pop up the Chrome DevTools, and I can say, let's look in the console and see if there are any JavaScript errors and that kind of thing, and we can walk through it together. As you're building Electron applications, instead of having to shut down the desktop application and then reload it again for every change that you make, Electron Reload is kind of like hot reload for your web applications. It monitors your project folder for any changes to HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. And if it detects a change to one of those files, it automatically reloads or refreshes the window so that you can keep on developing and changing and tweaking your application without having to shut it down and restart it again. If you do testing, if you've used, like, I've been using Node.js for years now, and the tool that I prefer is Mocha, or at least in the past I used a lot of Mocha. So Electron Mocha is a drop-in replacement for Mocha that understands the libraries that are made available in the Electron application, so that you can, you can test with the modules that are available to in Electron. There's a couple of built-in things now in the later versions of Electron. Devtron is a Chrome debug extension that gives you things like inter-process communications, where you can monitor the different messages that are going back and forth between your renderers and main process. It gives you a built-in linter and suggests things that you can do to improve your desktop applications. There's Spectron, which is a built on Chrome driver and WebDriver IO for doing like front-end behavior testing with your application. And to getting started with Electron, I always suggest that you build an application or two without any, by going through the documentation and going through the steps. I've got an Electron workshop that I've done that's about 4 hours long. That's on my GitHub repo, and it steps you through all the things that we've talked about plus a lot more. It covers debugging, covers creating inter-process communications, creating menus, all the basic things that you need to create an Electron application. I recommend that you start there first so that you understand what Electron is doing, and at that point, after you've got that kind of under your belt, then you can look at something like an Electron boilerplate that packages up a lot of those things for you. The mistake that I feel like I made when I got started with Electron is that I started with a boilerplate project, but I didn't know what the problems that I ran into. I didn't know if there was problems with the boilerplate or problems with Electron. I was just really confused. So, but once you have some, the fundamentals of how Electron works, the boilerplate projects are pretty awesome. They have things around packaging and deployments that make it really easy to brand your application as you want it, and they add some nice utilities along the way. So there's Electron boilerplate is kind of a front-end agnostic boilerplate, so you can add whatever you want to on top of that. There's also boilerplates for just about any front-end frameworks. There's React and Angular and Vue. If there's some other front-end framework that you use, there may be another Electron boilerplate for that. So those are great ways to get started, or great ways to take your application to the next level. There are one really cool utility called Electron Pre-Built Compile. This is a drop-in replacement for the Electron runtime that gives you, it essentially has Babel and TypeScript and GraphQL and a number of other things built into the runtime. So you can build things that are beyond the current version of Node that the language features or if you want to use TypeScript, you can just, it treats these things as native type things. So it just understands this stuff out of the box. It knows how to work with React, how to use less and Sass, how to use Jade templates, how to use Vue components. It's just a really nice, if you're using any of those kinds of things or think you will, then it's a nice drop-in replacement that just allows you to do those things without having to have a compile step or a build step. Here's a couple of examples of some applications that I've created with Electron. So this application in particular is, I use jQuery and I believe Twitter Bootstrap. I'm not a designer, but for this particular application, I felt like the font awesome icons that come with Twitter Bootstrap and the nice stylings and everything. I thought the application, this app only took me 2 weeks to create, and most of that was the report generation side of it, not the front end or the tools that the desktop gave me. There's a CSS framework called Photon Kit that helps you to skin your Electron applications. So right now it makes your applications look like a really beautiful Mac app. So if you build an app with Photon and deploy it to Windows, it looks like a really beautiful Mac app running on Windows, which is pretty cool. I don't have a problem with that. So this is an application that I created using Photon Kit, and it styles the drop downs and check boxes and all those kind of elements to make it look more like a Mac application. I think long term the goal is to add Windows UI elements to the Photon Kit, and it can, I think it's under beta, but you don't have to do anything to make it look native on either operating system. It's going to render the correct way. Some tips. I know on the Mac, when you're in the browser, Safari or Chrome or whatever, and you move your mouse over a hyperlink or something that's clickable, the cursor turns into what looks like a cartoon hand. People don't expect that in a desktop application. So you can set the default cursor in CSS to be a pointer across all the elements. If you have multiple windows, you can, and someone goes to close one of those windows, you can just hide it so that if you need to show it again, you can just show it instead of recreating that window. That's just a little, UI, UX improvement instead of, waiting the cycles for that window to create again. A poor man's multi-threading is to offload work. Some work has to be done on the main process. There's no other way around it. But to keep your UI responsive, maybe if you need to go and download some stuff from some APIs or check for messages or that kind of thing, you can send an IPC message to your main process that's like a command to say, hey, go do this, and then send me a message back when you're done. And that way, from the user's perspective, the UI remains really responsive. They can do whatever they want, and then in the background, you are going and doing that kind of heavy lifting. The processing, building reports, building files, all those kind of things can be done on the background on the main process. A question I get asked a lot is, what about local storage, or what about dealing with databases and so forth? So on local storage, you can certainly, because it's Node.js, you can read and write JSON files. I recommend something like FS Jetpack or FS Extra that makes it, even more easy to read and write JavaScript objects to JSON files. You can use something like AnyDB, which is kind of like a MongoDB API for reading and under the covers, under the hood, it's reading and writing JSON files, but it presents a MongoDB type API that you can query documents and load those things, insert and update documents. PouchDB is a feature parity API with CouchDB. So, if you're comfortable with Couch, you can use PouchDB to read and write local storage. The cool thing about PouchDB is that you can synchronize it with a CouchDB server. So in the offline disconnected scenario, you can do a bunch of data entry, a bunch of work, and then when your application is back online and can reconnect with the database, it can synchronize all those documents between the desktop app and the server. Because you're using Node.js, anything that's available to Node, you can use in your desktop applications as well. So if you want to build a line of business application that communicates with messaging systems, with relational databases, with all different kinds of servers and platforms, there's modules available for just about everything you can imagine, and you can do that. So on the relational database storage side, there's lots of modules available for SQL Server. My personal favorite is Seriate. There's PG for Postgres and MySQL. There's Oracle DB. So any kind of relational database that you need to communicate with, there's probably a module available for that. From here, these are some resources that I can point you to. If you search Google for Awesome Electron, you'll come to this link right here. And it is a one-stop shop of everything Electron. There's sample applications, there's tutorials, there's videos, there's reference applications, there's a list of companies that are using Electron. It's just anything and everything imaginable Electron. If you have access to Pluralsight, there is a really excellent course, Electron Fundamentals by Jake Trent. This is the course I wish I had created. He beat me to it. It really is awesome. The documentation at Electron is actually really good. There's a getting started guide, and there's an easy to getting started project that you can clone and start building your own application. And then there's a nice Electron community on Slack where you can go and ask questions about things that you're running into, or and I've always found the Electron community to be really helpful and welcoming. Last thing I want to tell you is that you don't need permission to be awesome. I really believe that the technology that we have at our fingertips enables us to have a huge impact on our workplaces and our community and even the world. We have just incredible opportunity and potential to have a positive impact on folks. And I hope that the things that you're learning at this conference, that you go back to your workplace or whatever it is that you do next week, and you're able to take the things that you're learning and you be awesome. Thank you very much. I have some stickers up here if you're interested in stickers. If you have any questions, I'll be up here. You can come talk to me, or come find me out in the hallways, or I'll be around all day today. So again, Twitter is probably one of the best ways to keep in contact with me. I'm kind of a loudmouth on Twitter. I try to be funny, and sometimes I succeed.